This is all right, isn't it? It's worse places to be. So I was originally going to talk, well, I had a slot for an hour tomorrow. I now have about 40 minutes. So not because Jim overran, but just because the slot I have today is shorter. But that's okay, because actually I haven't had time to prepare either. So I'll just miss out. I'll just miss out all the stuff that I haven't prepared. I think this is the third time I've done this, so I'm looking across the room, I probably have encountered half of you before, which is fantastic, and the other half of you, I'd love to have the chance to say hi later. My name's Neil. You can tell I'm from England, but I'm a research director at a small analyst firm, and my focus at the company is to help us make sense of what's happening in the world of automation and how digital technology is changing work and the workplace. Now, my presentation is a little bit different from Jim's. It's much more focused particularly around automation and how technologies are changing that. And what this is an attempt to do, and I do this every year here, and they keep asking me back like, Jim, so I must be doing something okay. This is this is a work in progress, and I've done this every year. I've kind of brought new stuff to you all and road tested it with you. So please do give me feedback if there's time now or afterwards. What I'm going to do is just really show you an analysis and a synthesis of a whole load of conversations I've been having with our community and our clients, primarily in Europe. So what I'm trying to do here is make sense of about 50 different conversations that I've had, which really all revolved around what the hell is happening, particularly in this world of automation in business and in knowledge work. The amount of times I'm having this conversation of, okay, we've heard about this RPA thing, we've got some BPM, does that mean we don't need BPM anymore? Do we need RPA? Do we need both? How do they fit together? That's just one example of the kind of conversation I'm having to have over and over again. So what I'm trying to do here is show you where we're at, okay? And try and give you a snapshot of where I think organizations are at based on conversations I've had. And so it's a bit of a work in progress, but hopefully you'll find it interesting, and I'd love to get your feedback. All right. All right, so what I'm going to talk about is something at the moment I'm calling an intelligent automation agenda. Tomorrow it might be something different. If you all tell me that's a terrible name, I'll change it. It kind of works. I'm going to talk about, again, based on conversations I'm having with real organizations struggling with this right now, try and talk about how it looks as if these different technologies are starting to fit together and what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. Not just RPA and BPM, but also case management, decision management, AI technologies, and so on. And then for all of you guys who are vendors in the room, I've got a couple of things, like I had last year and the year before, points to leave you with to think about. If you really want to address what seems to be happening, these are the kinds of things I think you need to be thinking about. So, let's get started. This is actually, I was bored at an event one day, and I was seeing somebody say that AI was the future of automation, and I thought, oh, that's kind of fun, because I thought there were loads of other things that were the future of automation. So I sort of mocked up this thing. This is actually based on a control panel from a nuclear power station. But, you know, depending on who you talk to, people will say, oh, yeah, you know, our thing is the future of automation. The challenge that I'm having when I try and talk to our community about this is they all say, well, yeah, but everyone's telling me they're the future of automation. What's the answer? And the answer is, well, actually, it's kind of true. The future of automation is not one thing. It's actually a whole blend of things. But this is a real problem. And I'd love to know later on maybe how many of you are seeing this in your conversations as well. That people really are they're quite exercised to try and think of, okay, well, what's the priority here? Where does all this fit? Because if you talk to RPA vendors, they'll say, we're baking AI into our products and that's basically all you'll ever need. And if you don't provide that, then, well, you need to have something to say in that conversation. But why are we here in the first place, right? Why are we in a situation where particularly larger organizations in banking or insurance or retail or telecoms or utilities or wherever they might be are saying, well, we've got all this stuff and we just don't really know what to do first and how it all fits together. And you guys are really, really smart, and you've been around forever, so I luckily can go through this section really quickly. So I think I may have even showed this slide last year. Some of these slides are from client decks, so this is stuff that you may have seen before. But you understand this, right? Basically, we live in a world of abundance, which is a challenge for anybody like me who's pushing 50. I was trained in a world of scarcity. When I was trained to develop, to write code, to build systems, I had to worry about bandwidth, I had to worry about compute, I had to worry about disk, I had to think about how often I compiled stuff. I had to be really careful about everything. Fundamentally, the world we live in today is completely different set of constraints. They're not constraints around fundamental resources, actually constraints around architecture and choice and governance. Very different way of thinking. That is, of course, not a business concern necessarily, but what it drives is a big shift in the nature of resource usage. So this is actually Cisco's slide. I don't know if you've seen this. This is kind of interesting. This is a map of the marketing technology portfolio of Cisco. That's just their marketing technology portfolio, right? So, and I didn't draw this, Cisco did. But these are all of the tools they use, and they're all cloud-based. I found that quite surprising. That's a lot of apps. And they're not unusual, right? So the whole SaaS thing, we all know, is exploding. And there's a clear drive towards, sorry, this is being obscured. There we go. There's a clear drive towards using more and more stuff in the cloud. And it's not just about infrastructure, it's about applications too. Here's another fun slide. Again, business implications of all of that change, that shift to abundance. This is the technology abundance drives competitor abundance. If you're in financial services or retail or utilities or insurance or hospitality or whatever you're in. So this is interesting, right? This is the fintech landscape in Holland. Just in Holland. All right, if you looked in the UK, you'd see a few replications, but you'd see an awful lot of difference. You're not supposed to be able to, really look at all the logos. The point is you can't see them because there's so many. But if you were to look in the UK, you'd see different. If you look in France, you'd see different. If you look in Germany, you'd see different. If you look here, you'd see different, and so on and so on. There are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of apps and platforms out there. So we see the technology abundance driving competitor and platform abundance, and that creates a fair amount of challenge. You've probably seen slides like this around. There's a few really great sources of them. But again, so what we're seeing is that whether we're talking about logistics and distribution or retail or insurance, for example, we're seeing competitive dynamics where new digital native startups are able to pick apart the business models of the big incumbent players and start to nibble away at the edges of their business model. And they can do this because many of them are well funded, but also because they have access to almost free resources in terms of the way they build the core of their business. And they don't have the overheads of the big incumbent players, right? So we all know that. You all know that. You're clever people. Jim referred to the GDPR. I love the GDPR. I love it. I love it, I love it, I love it. Because it's forcing everybody to think, hang on, what are we really doing here? Do we really need to do it this way? How can we make sure we don't get fined 4% of our annual revenue? And by the way, it doesn't matter if you're based here. If you've got any customers at all who are based in the EU, you're affected. All right? So maybe not all of you, but almost all of you, your companies will have to comply to the GDPR. So it's not just about companies that are based in the EU. So that's not something you want to get wrong. I've got a whole load of other material about that, but we won't go into it. This is from a survey we did a few months ago where we asked a bunch of CIOs from our community, about 65, what their key priorities were in terms of what's core to their strategy now, and we mapped that versus what are they actively exploring. And, you know, in line with all that other stuff, what you can see is there's a strong, now, what I should say is that there's a bias in our community towards more established, larger organizations, maybe as you would expect. So you can see that they're reflecting really a desire to try and build operational models that are more competitive with new digital native startups. So they're trying to get cost out, yes, of course. They're trying to get people out, although they wouldn't say that, and they're trying to become more agile, they're trying to become more scalable, and they're trying to become more data-driven. All right? Hi, Denny.
Kind of interesting that nobody's investing in their core technology or their core strategy.
Oh, so we asked people, tell us how much this is something you're doing right now and how much it's something you're investigating. And of course, we gave people the chance to say both. So.
Yeah, but I would have expected the top right corner to have at least a couple of pieces.
Oh, well, so
strategy and our main investment.
Well, so they're investigating their potential. So if it's up here, it's something they're exploring. They're trying to figure out how it works, where it fits. If it's down here, then it's something they're really betting on right now. Yeah, investigating. Sorry, did I say investing? I'm sorry. I'm rushing. That says investigating, doesn't it? You all need to turn your heads. Okay. So that's the world we're living in, all right? And again, as I said, this is a representation of conversations that we've been having, and this is the world that in our community we're seeing. Lots of fear, frankly, about new digital native startups, lots of disruption, lots of chaos, lots of confusion, lots of desire to drive more efficiency, to become more predictable, more data-driven, more agile, and more scalable. Clearly, automation, that's kind of at the heart of all of that stuff, right? If you want to do those things, you really need to think about how to automate more of the way your business works.
So that's a quick question on this one as well. Where would you put appification?
Appification, I like that. What? Oh, appification.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a little bit like serverless, microservices, but at least in Holland, we're seeing everybody's talking about open APIs.
Yep.
Open up our backends.
Right.
Way over to the right in terms of how forward it is.
Yeah, and I have to, no, that's a really good question, and where we didn't fall short. We were quite careful about the number of things we gave people to choose from. So, however, you mentioned PSD2 earlier. Clearly, you know, in Europe, any bank is figuring this out right now. Do they just go vanilla, like the basic of what we have to do? Do we become more aggressive? And certainly in banking in Europe, we're seeing it's a huge priority. And many of the banks that I've spoken to are basically, they're kind of just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks, and they'll try and figure it all out later. But yes, that maps onto, technologically, it maps onto API management, it maps onto serverless microservices, and maps onto integration. So, that's the context. And here's where I'm kind of presenting work in progress, okay? So, you may look at this and go, whoa, that's a bit of an odd way to look at it. I would love feedback about this. So, when I've been trying, and my colleagues have been trying to help customers figure out how this kind of tsunami of technologies fits together to help them automate work, we figured out that the best way to do it is to break work apart. Okay, so the idea of knowledge work in your organization, to kind of break it apart and say, well, what's involved in actually using technology to improve the way that work gets done? Bless you. And we kind of iterated a bit, and we've, at the moment anyway, this is kind of where we'd end up. It's a kind of like a rough schematic of the kinds of things that happen in an organization when work gets done. All right? So very briefly, you have, and there's immediately, you can pull holes in this, right? Why have I put two tasks? Really, logically, should I just have one task and then you can repeat it as many times as you like? I get it. But you know, you have tasks, atomic things that need to get done by something, and you have decisions that need to get made about what tasks are going to get done and how you're going to move through the work. You have a capability that tells you how the work needs to flow and who it needs to be assigned to or which actors need to make things happen. And you have some context around that, some data which tells you Okay, what are you actually working on? How are you going to resolve these issues? And then you have some resources that you're going to use to actually transform your inputs and into your outputs. And you have some triggers that tell you when the work needs to get done, and you have a goal that you're trying to achieve. Now, the reason why I've done this is because this really helps when you start to try and help people figure out what's the impact of different technologies, because they impact different parts of this work schematic. And what we've ended up doing is to get people to think about different kinds of work. And in fact, I've been doing this with clients probably for about 7 or 8 years. But it's become more of a core focus. And we're talking, broadly speaking, about 3 different categories of work, things that need to get done. And we categorize them based on how much is predefined. So when you look at that work schematic, there are fundamentally 3 different kinds of approaches you can take to work and the way you automate it. You have a bucket of programmatic work, which is basically you predefine everything. Yeah, so everything in that work schematic is predefined. It's designed up front, whether it's tasks, decisions, it's the flow, it's the assignments, it's the context, it's the goal, it's the triggers, it's everything. Or you also have this notion of transactional work where you basically predefine less, but you do have some structure. And then you have the idea of exploratory work where really actually the only thing you're defining up front is the goal and maybe some of the tasks. And I realize this is where I should have prepared a bit more. I realize I'm now going to show you that because I forgot. So, so graphically speaking, exploratory work, you define the goal up front, and you may have some tasks up front that you're going to define, and you can say, yeah, these things definitely have to be part of the picture, but we're fairly kind of laissez-faire about the way that work flows and the assignments and some of the decisions. They're going to be dynamic. We all know that. We all probably think of case management when we think about frameworks for automating that kind of work. Transactional work is kind of the domain traditionally of workflow technology. And historically, we've really designed up front all the tasks, the decisions, pretty much all the flow, and the goal. And some of those tasks may actually be automated, and some of them may be given to people. And then, in environments where we've had straight-through processing, we have programmatic work where basically everything is hammered down right from the start. And this is it turns out, anyway, in my experience, this is quite a handy framework for getting people to think about the impacts of new technologies. None of this is rocket science, but it's surprising, particularly when you talk to people who are more on the business side. Well, maybe it's not surprising, how few of them really think like this. They just think, oh, well, we have a process, and this is kind of how it looks, and then we have some implementation. What they don't necessarily do is actually think, well, this part of the process is actually different in nature to that part. And we should actually optimize, we should automate, and we should plan, and we should strategize based on those different kinds of patterns. Now, this is where I'm going to go into a bit more depth. I believe the deck's going to be shared afterwards, and there'll be a video. I don't have time to go line by line through all of this. The next 3 are eye charts. So, with apologies, let's look at how different kinds of technologies are now starting to play in this exploratory world. So, remember that the kind of core of stuff we're designing up front is the pink stuff. So, what we're finding in our conversations with organizations is they're starting with a framework of case management, often. Not always, but that's kind of what we want them to think about. Well, case management is kind of your wrapper. It's the holder for this kind of strategy. And then here's the different places that these different technologies can play. What we can do is we can triage work based on AI services. So some unstructured inputs coming in, and we can make sense of some of those unstructured inputs, whether that's speech, whether it's figuring out, is an email a complaint, or is it a request for a change of address, for example. But you're really only going to do that where the frequency of the work or the scale of the work is high, because otherwise it's just not worth doing that right now. What we're also seeing is organizations want to think about Jim talked about best next actions, with predictive ML models, right? So fundamentally statistical models based on historical performance of the work to figure out, okay, where we have a big history of that work and we've got, again, quite high frequency and scale of the work, and crucially, where we also know that satisfaction of the goal is a problem, where we have variable ability to satisfy that goal, maybe we have a customer sat problem because really people aren't following the right flow enough of the time, or they're not making the right decisions enough of the time, maybe because we have a lot of staff turnover, or because some of the procedures or the policies we have in place aren't great, or maybe we're not good at training. We can use predictive ML models to give us a boost in terms of decision making and next best action. We talk to clients about how they can externalize decisions with decision management technology. Again, we're talking about operational automation here. So we're not talking about the analytics side, the kind of architecture piece of decision management. We're talking about the operational piece here. Again, where frequency and scale is high, and when transparency and or agility are key. Right? So when you have a need to make those decisions very transparent, when you have a need to be able to be agile with that decision making over time, then externalize through decision management. Again, we see organizations wanting to think about ML models, predictive ML models, not only to predict the next best action, but also what's the right kind of guidance I need to be able to solve this particular problem in this situation? Which policies do I need to look at? Bring those right into the context of the work. And again, we can use ML models to bring those recommendations into the context. And everybody wants to talk about RPA. So we kind of talk about that a lot too. And really the role it plays in this exploratory work, how many of you have heard of the distinction between attended and unattended RPA? You put your hands up. Okay, about 50%. So very briefly for anybody who hasn't sort of already come into contact with that. So RPA, fundamentally about interacting with automating application interactions through robots, scripts. But there's two core patterns to the way that can be done. One is in an unattended mode. It's like a headless mode where bots will work semi-autonomously and they'll drive work without any human involvement whatsoever. And there's an attended mode where really these things actually sit on an agent's desktop or on a worker's desktop, and they provide smart assists to do tasks on behalf of that user, actually in the context of that work. And what we see here is that there's a role for attended RPA, so like the desktop-based version, where these things sit in the flow of the work and they help workers with key tasks to help drive resource automation in the context of that. Is this all making sense as a way to think about how this stuff fits together? Am I going too slow? Am I going too fast? Is this useful? Let's go. Okay, right, awesome. I think I have about 15 minutes, so I might have to speed up a bit. Luckily, it gets a little bit less complicated from now on. When we look at transactional work, so again, think about the core container for this way of thinking about automation as your traditional workflow system. We see people, again, where does AI play in this? And if you're looking at AI fundamentally as pattern recognition, whether that's speech, video, image, text analysis and so on, then fundamentally that AI services stuff, most of that work is going to be around understanding inputs and prioritizing and triaging and determining work based on that. Because that's really different, I think, from predictive models using essentially statistical analysis, not neural network stuff, but all the other stuff which we've known about for 50 years. So that's where that plays. Again, externalization of decision management is really, really important, where you've got frequency and scale is high and you want agility, and when you need the transparency. And again, attended RPA to help people who are driving tasks in the flow of work, to help them speed up some of their interactions with legacy systems. And those things are very different, again, from the way you would apply these technologies in a programmatic work environment. So here you have a whole different set of things. Well, some of them are the same, some of them are different, in terms of how you can apply kind of turbocharges to different parts of that work schematic. Yeah? So you may decide to externalize task logic with business logic services. You may use function as a service. You may use whatever it is you're going to use. This is where unattended RPA plays, right? So where you're really driving interactions with back-end systems in an unattended fashion. But again, you're only going to do that really where you've got the frequency and the scale of work is high, and where where the systems landscape is kind of fragmented, where you can't actually automate that through APIs and so on. And this is also where one analyst firm calls them HIPs, hybrid integration platforms. Some people call them iPaaS, some people call them digital integration platforms. That's also where these things play as well, right? In the domain of programmatic work, really straight through processing. So this is kind of what we're trying to talk to people about, to get them to think about the different roles that different automation technologies can play in the way that they get work done in their organization. And at a level up from that, what we're seeing is people wanting to do this kind of stuff. Fundamentally using technologies to try and push more and more of the work down, to make more and more of it automated and programmatic. And where people are, where we have this automated zone, if you like, increasingly automated zone, to use case management tools to essentially manage all the exceptions. Because a lot of the time the automation cannot be, almost all the time, the automation cannot be 100% accurate, complete, successful. So we need a framework that helps us actually manage exceptions, and increasingly case management in some form is being used to think about that. So we're seeing different patterns of technologies being applied in different parts of the work. We're seeing more and more organizations wanting to talk about, well, when we think about this end-to-end process, actually, can we compartmentalize this work so that we have some bits which are very discretionary and exploratory, some bits which are very transactional, and some bits which are very programmatic. And this is a conversation that people want to have a lot. How can we reason about the work in a more fine-grained way? How can we apply automations and augmentation strategies in different ways across these levels? And how can we push more and more of that work down so that it becomes more programmatic? And then where we have stuff up here, can we augment that work with kind of smart assists? And can we use case management to help us manage exceptions? Is this all good? Yeah? All right, awesome. I think I may even be on time, Nathaniel.
We're down to 5 breaks, so you can go. As long as...
Well, unless I go back and talk more. Yeah, I'm kind of approaching the end of the presentation, but I'm happy to talk if any of you want to ask questions after. So that's kind of where we're at in terms of understanding fundamentally what companies want to do with different technologies, and how we're kind of starting to talk with them about how they can apply different tech. Because often there's just not that understanding that these things play complementary roles. And the first question is always, does X replace Y? And in almost all cases, the answer is no, it does not. And here's kind of how they need to fit together. But what does all this mean for anybody who builds tools or platforms? I think there's a couple of things it means. And here's a chart which definitely needs more work, but I think it might be interesting anyway. I thought, hang on, this is quite interesting. If I take that idea of exploratory work, transactional work, programmatic work, and then I look at different kinds of processes in a business across a different axis, what does that tell me about where technology is going? And here's a kind of, here's an early draft of something which I think gives me a sense anyway of where this stuff is going. So, with apologies for the abbreviations because of space. So here's the different levels of work, right? So we've got P for programmatic, we've got T, I must be doing something right if people are standing up and taking photos, that's good. T for transactional, and E for exploratory, right? So these are different technologies that can apply at different levels in that work stack almost. And then on the left we've got technologies which are going to be used to automate where you've got core business processes, essentially at the head. If you think about a head and a long tail of work, with that kind of the heavy duty core of work that adds value in an organization gets done. And on the right is where you've got all the supporting processes and more of a long tail kind of feel. And there's a whole load of stuff happening, isn't there? Wow. So you all saw Salesforce, but, well, assuming that the investors don't sue successfully, MuleSoft is going to get bought by Salesforce. So we've got packaged apps kind of trying to drive down into the integration platform space. We've got Automation Anywhere just announced this thing called a bot. Anybody from Automation Anywhere here? No? So they just announced a bot store. What's that?
Well, we have them, so.
Okay, so they just announced a bot store, which is pretty interesting because at the first glance you think, oh, that's interesting. So you can, it's basically an app store for their robots. So you can get these things off the shelf if you're a client, and you can just get started straight away. Well, yes, but what's really interesting about the bot store is it's not just about legacy app integration through the UI. The first things you see in that bot store are things like create new lead in Salesforce. Well, that's interesting because pretty much all interaction with Salesforce is through APIs. So we think of them right now as an RPA player, but that's not where they are. Well, that's not where they want to be. They are driving towards the left. Okay, they're doing more and more work, which is all about kind of more programmatic integration on the left side. So we've got all of the, pretty much all of the RPA players driving up, investing in AI services and ML toolkits so that they can have more of an impact at different levels of the work stack. We've got the workflow guys trying to get into the low code and the high productivity application platform as a service. Don't you love that acronym? Space, I think that's the Forrester one. I think somebody probably got a prize for that. And then you've got also numerous partnerships between the workflow technology people and the RPA. I've missed off the attended RPA piece. I realize that's something I need to add. But you've got a whole load of stuff happening. And it's lots of stuff going in different directions. The only reason I'm really showing this to you is to show you that it's a fast-moving space. No client is going to go one place for everything, right? So this is a mixed environment. It's a hella, as young people would say, it's a hella mixed environment. I'm not a young person, so that makes me feel uncomfortable. But yeah, it's moving fast, very dynamic. I think we can be kind of predictable about what's going to happen. I'm not quite at that stage yet, but I'm getting a sense for what's going on in this very fast-moving space. What does it mean, though, if you provide these technologies? I said some of this last year, and I'm going to say it again now. If you haven't already and you want to play a role, an expansive role in helping to drive the automation agenda in your clients, then you need to be really, really seriously, if you haven't already, re-architecting your products. You need to shift away from hard-edged, kind of one-size-fits-all product deployments where you have the thing, you sell the thing, the customer gets the thing, they install the thing, and then they use the thing. We have to get away from that. What you have is a set of capabilities that the customer can deploy in various different configurations. Yes, many of them may start with the thing, but they may not necessarily end up with the thing. They may end up with variations on the thing. That was very technical, wasn't it? Sorry. And we need to, you need to start to shift towards providing collections of independent, self-sufficient services. Why? 3 reasons. Part of it is just if you're serious about delivering the cloud and you want to do that competitively, you have to actually architect around collaborating microservices, because otherwise it's just very hard to be economically efficient. It gives you more flexibility in your product offering portfolio, so you can give people multiple entry points and you can help them on different journeys, as Jim pointed out. You don't have to prescribe a journey that says this is the journey you have to be on if you want to use our product. You can actually play in multiple different initiatives more easily. And also, it helps you deal with more unpredictable demand. And the other thing I will leave you with is that don't just think about how you can add value in operation in a client's environment. Because I just put these colors on here to show the kind of multi-vendor, multi-provider nature of the technology environment. They don't really signify anything in particular. This is just supposed to mean there's blends of technologies that are going to play here. So yes, think about where you sit, which colors you can paint different parts of this work. Yes, absolutely. But also think about, is there a role you can play to help clients make sense of this all in terms of life cycle, in terms of how they develop, how they analyze, how they architect, how they deploy, how they analyze, and how they improve. So think about, can you help them with an integrated view of governance and change management? Can you help them with an integrated view of performance so they can understand how the work as a whole is changing and where new opportunities might exist? It's not just about which colors can you paint which bits of this work stack, but there's another way you can add value around the edges. Thank you. So I've got 3 minutes. Bruce.
Very interesting. So you had that slide about how vendors can optimize their strategy by not making the box the thing, making lots of services that people can use. But on the other side, there was this idea of the digital business platform, as if the customer is actually going to buy a thing, as opposed to buying 100 things,
right,
and looking for some lightweight way to screw them together. So is there such a thing as a digital business platform that's not something that the customer just kind of wires together themselves?
That is a lovely question. That's a lovely question. So the question was, with all this in mind, a lot of people talk about digital business platforms. Is there such a thing as a digital business platform? Is that a good? Yeah. So the answer is yes and no. Yes, there is, but it's primarily, its value is actually about educating customers about the way they can use technologies together. I think the idea of a kind of homogeneous, kind of licensed platform, for most people is, I could be impolite, I'll put it politely, for most people it's not going to be the way they will probably engage with it. What they want to see, what I'm finding, is they want to hear stories about how they can use these technologies over time, so they can start where they are, they can grow towards a kind of vision of a platform. So over time, we want to get to a platform that looks like this. But we want to approach that, again, coming back to your point, Jim, about different, did you call them micro journeys or mini journeys? Take the journeys we want to take and fill that out over time. So yes, I think the bigger vendors need to have a story to tell, but it's not necessarily the way they should think that their customers are going to buy right now.
So
May, Michael?
Again, we have a platform, and primarily it's really around packaging, the way that people look at automation. Because what we found is customers that they were doing workflow, they weren't necessarily looking at how content plays into the workflow solutions versus how data capture or capturing images to kind of, which I think data drives a lot of how workflow works. They were working in different groups, and so at IBM we just decided to simplify it so that we broke a lot of the walls.
Yep.
And think of automation holistically instead of the individual parts.
So the value to IBM about the automation story is really about kind of opening up the box and saying, look, there's all this stuff. It kind of works. We should talk to you about how we can make it work for you better than you do right now. Right. Right. Right.
And from the customer perspective, my current job right now to help me is to create a global workflow and case management platform for our company. And one of my biggest issues right now is convincing my boss, my new boss, who's a bit of the old world, that a platform is not something that you compile and distribute. It's a logical concept.
Right.
That's correct. Multiple technologies, including a few in this room. But it's more than just technology. It's the framework for how you think about processes, which I'm absolutely going to steal that from me.
You're welcome.
Governance, organizational model is everything. So think of the platform as a logical entity consisting of many physical tools that you know yourselves.
Yeah, it's not, again, like I think we're selling you pieces of things to do automation, but we weren't thinking about the outcomes of what you do. When we think about the outcomes, and I like what you said, Jim, and you were talking about goals at the end. They think of the problem that
Should I unplug my stuff?
end consumers or just suppliers or just consumers. So there's a lot of ontological puzzles.
Awesome. Okay. Any more questions? Does that all make sense? Oh, yes, hi. Hi, Francois.
I was wondering about cloud and GDPR.
Yeah.
The impact GDPR may have of the move between private and public cloud computing.
Yeah.
We could talk putting everything on the cloud, but there are some issues with data and stuff.
Yeah.
I would say the personal data is not. What is your position about it?
So it's kind of, there's like an hour-long talk, but fundamentally, I don't think it prevents people. It doesn't prevent people from using cloud technologies, from using fundamentally managed hosting technologies. It might prevent them from using some configurations from some providers. I think it's a huge opportunity for any process technology vendor, huge opportunity, because one of the key things that you have to do in implementing the GDPR is to have well-documented, well-implemented procedures for managing subject access requests, doing all that kind of stuff. It's clearly a huge architecture opportunity too, because people need to know where their data is, what data they even have, all of the processing activities and so on. So in terms of the cloud, I don't see it stopping anybody doing it. I see it just changing people's perceptions about where they need to put stuff, how they're going to manage it. There's bigger questions, I think, fundamentally further down the line around things like Jim, you mentioned digital identity, around self-sovereign identity. And I think there'll be some huge architectural changes around process and around data when we get to that, but that's not here yet. But we could talk more about that, absolutely. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
We now have a